Isabella sat in her car outside her house, staring at the phone in her trembling hands. The explicit photos and messages between her husband Robert and his secretary burned into her mind like acid. 3 years of marriage, and this was how she found out about his betrayal. Not through confession or guilt, but through a careless mistake when he left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. "Can't wait to feel you again tonight," read one message from someone named Vanessa. Below it was a photo that made Isabella's stomach turn. The timestamp showed it was sent just 2 hours ago, while Robert was supposedly in a meeting. Her hands shook as she scrolled through weeks of messages. The affair had been going on for months. While she had been planning their 3rd anniversary dinner, he had been planning secret meetings with his secretary. While she had been working extra hours to save money for the house renovation he wanted, he had been spending money on expensive hotels and gifts for another woman. The worst part wasn't just the cheating. It was the lies. All those late nights he claimed to be working. All those business trips that seemed to happen more and more frequently. All those times he came home and kissed her cheek, pretending to be the loving husband while carrying the scent of another woman. Isabella felt sick. She had given this man everything. She had supported his career when he was struggling to make partner at his law firm. She had put her own dreams on hold to be the perfect wife he claimed to want. She had believed him when he said she was the only woman for him. Now, looking at message after message of him telling Vanessa the same sweet words he used to whisper to Isabella, she realized she had been living a lie. The man she loved, the man she had pledged her life to, didn't exist. He was a stranger wearing the face of her husband. The phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Vanessa, and the preview made Isabella's blood run cold. "Robert, I think we should tell your wife soon. I'm tired of hiding and I want to be with you properly." Robert's response came quickly. "Soon, baby? Isabella is so boring anyway. She won't even fight for me. Once I'm free, we can be together forever." Isabella dropped the phone like it had burned her. The casual cruelty in his words hurt more than any physical blow could have. Boring. That's what 3 years of devotion had earned her. She had sacrificed her social life, her hobbies, even her close friendships because Robert said he needed her support. She had made herself small to make him feel big, and this was her reward. She sat in the car for 20 more minutes, reading through the entire conversation history. The planning, the lies, the intimate details of their affair, it was all there. Robert and Vanessa had been laughing about how clueless Isabella was. They had been making plans for their future while casually discussing how to get rid of the inconvenient wife. When Isabella finally walked into the house, she found Robert in the living room, watching television like nothing had happened. He looked up at her with a smile that now seemed poisonous. "Hey honey, how was your day?" he asked, as if he hadn't spent his lunch break in a hotel room with his secretary. Isabella looked at this man she had shared a bed with for 3 years. This man who had promised to love and cherish her. This man who had been systematically destroying their marriage while she remained faithful and devoted. "It was educational," she said quietly. Robert raised an eyebrow but turned back to the television. He had no idea that his wife had just discovered the truth. He had no idea that the woman he thought was boring and weak had just found the strength she never knew she possessed. Isabella went upstairs to their bedroom and sat on the bed they had shared for 3 years. The same bed where he had made love to her just last week, telling her she was beautiful and that he loved her. How many times had he come home from Vanessa and touched Isabella with the same hands? How many lies had he whispered in her ear in this very room? She opened the closet and looked at all the clothes she had bought to please him. The conservative dresses he preferred. The colors he said looked good on her. Even her wardrobe had become an extension of his control over her life. No more. Isabella pulled out her laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. If Robert thought she was too boring to fight for their marriage, he was about to learn how wrong he was. She wouldn't fight to keep a cheating husband, but she would fight to make sure he didn't destroy her in the process of leaving. As she scrolled through attorney profiles, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years: anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through the hurt and betrayal. Robert had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the woman who had loved him completely. But that woman was gone now. The woman researching divorce lawyers and documenting his affair was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't let herself be destroyed by a man who had never deserved her in the first place. The phone downstairs buzzed again with another message from Vanessa. Isabella smiled grimly. Let them plan their future together. She had her own plans to make. Isabella waited 3 days before confronting Robert. 3 days of watching him lie to her face, kiss her goodbye in the morning, and come home pretending to be tired from work when she knew he had been with Vanessa. 3 days of him asking what was wrong when she seemed distant, all while continuing to text his lover right in front of her. She used those 3 days wisely. She contacted the divorce attorney, gathered financial documents, and took screenshots of every single message and photo on Robert's phone. She also did something she had never done in their entire relationship. She put herself first. On Friday evening, Robert came home later than usual, claiming he had been stuck in traffic after a client meeting. Isabella knew better. The GPS on his phone showed he had been at the Riverside Hotel for 2 hours. "We need to talk," Isabella said as soon as he walked through the door. Robert loosened his tie and headed for the kitchen. "Can it wait, Izzy? I'm exhausted. It's been a long day." "I'm sure it has," Isabella replied, following him. "Vanessa must be very demanding." Robert froze with his hand on the refrigerator door. For a moment the mask slipped, and Isabella saw panic flash across his face. Then he recovered, turning to face her with a confused expression that would have been convincing if she hadn't seen his initial reaction. "What are you talking about? Who's Vanessa?" Isabella placed his phone on the kitchen counter between them. "Your secretary. Your lover. The woman you've been sleeping with for the past 4 months while telling me you love me." Robert stared at the phone, then at Isabella. She watched him calculate his next move. Would he deny it? Would he try to gaslight her into thinking she was crazy? Would he finally tell the truth? "Isabella, I can explain." "No," she interrupted. "You can't explain this. You can't explain how you've been planning a future with another woman while lying to my face every single day. You can't explain how you told her I was boring and wouldn't even fight for you. You can't explain how you've been stealing from our marriage to fund your affair." Robert's expression hardened. The fake confusion disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that Isabella had never seen before. It was like watching a stranger emerge from her husband's body. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, I'm seeing Vanessa. Yes, I love her. And yes, I want a divorce." Isabella had prepared herself for this moment, but hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. 3 years of marriage dismissed so casually. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Robert shrugged. 4 months. Maybe 5. I don't keep track." "Why? Why?" Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Look around, Isabella. Look at your life. Look at yourself. You're 28 years old and you act like you're 50. When was the last time you did something exciting? When was the last time you surprised me? You wake up, go to work, come home, cook dinner, and go to bed. Every single day. It's like being married to a robot." Each word was designed to hurt, and they hit their target. Isabella felt herself shrinking under his attack, just like she had for years whenever Robert was displeased with her. But then she remembered the messages on his phone. The way he and Vanessa had laughed about her. The casual cruelty with which he had dismissed their entire marriage. The anger she had discovered 3 days ago flared back to life. A robot. Isabella stepped closer to him. "I worked extra hours to help pay for your student loans. I gave up my friends because you said they were a bad influence. I stopped doing the things I loved because you said they were childish. I made myself into exactly what you said you wanted, and now you're punishing me for it." "I never asked you to give up anything," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You asked me to give up everything." Isabella's voice rose for the first time. "My photography hobby was a waste of time. My college friends were immature. My family was too involved in our business. Every single thing that made me happy, you found a reason why it was wrong. And I listened to you because I loved you and wanted to make you happy." "That's not my fault," Robert said. "I never forced you to do anything." Isabella stared at him in disbelief. "You're right. You didn't force me. I chose to trust you. I chose to believe you when you said you loved me. I chose to think that my husband would tell me if he was unhappy instead of sneaking around with his secretary." "Vanessa makes me happy in ways you never could," Robert said cruelly. "She's exciting. She's fun. She doesn't analyze every conversation to death or worry about what other people think. She just lives." "Then go live with her," Isabella said quietly. Robert blinked as if he hadn't expected her to give up so easily. "Isabella? No, you're right. We're not compatible. You need someone who excites you and I need someone who respects me. Someone who talks to me when there's a problem instead of running to another woman. Someone who honors the promises he makes." "It doesn't have to be ugly," Robert said, his tone shifting to something that might have been conciliatory if Isabella hadn't heard him planning her destruction just days before. "We can have an amicable divorce. Split everything 50-50 and move on with our lives." Isabella almost laughed. After everything he had put her through, he wanted an amicable divorce. After months of lying and cheating and emotional abuse, he wanted to play the reasonable ex-husband. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't have to be ugly. But it's going to be fair. I've already contacted an attorney. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday morning." Now Robert looked genuinely shocked. "You contacted an attorney? Did you think I would just disappear quietly? Let you rewrite history and pretend this is a mutual decision?" Isabella picked up his phone and handed it to him. "I know about the hotel rooms. I know about the gifts. I know about every lie you've told and every dollar you've spent on your affair. My attorney knows too." For the first time since she had confronted him, Robert looked worried. "Isabella, you don't understand. If we fight, it's going to cost both of us money we don't have. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to cheat on me." Robert's mask slipped again and Isabella saw the rage underneath. "You can't prove anything. It's just messages." "Messages, photos, credit card receipts, GPS data, hotel records," Isabella listed calmly. "You weren't as careful as you thought, Robert. But don't worry. I'm not trying to destroy you. I just want what's fair." "This is insane," Robert said. "You're acting crazy." Isabella smiled for the first time in days. "No, Robert. I'm acting sane. For the first time in years I'm thinking clearly. I can see exactly what this marriage was and what you are. And I'm done pretending otherwise." She walked toward the stairs then paused. "I'll be staying in the guest room until I find my own place. Don't worry, it won't be long. I'm sure you're eager to start your new life with Vanessa." As Isabella climbed the stairs, she heard Robert calling after her, his tone suddenly desperate. But she didn't turn around. The woman who would have run back to comfort him was gone. In her place was someone Robert had never met, someone who wouldn't be broken by his betrayal. Someone who was just getting started. The divorce proceedings took 6 months, and they were exactly as brutal as Isabella had expected. Robert's initial shock at her strength quickly turned to vindictive anger when he realized she wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. He hired an expensive attorney and tried to paint Isabella as an unstable woman who was making up stories about his affair. It might have worked if Isabella hadn't been so thorough in documenting everything. Her attorney, Patricia Blackwood, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in high-conflict divorces. She took one look at Isabella's evidence and smiled grimly. "Your husband made a lot of mistakes," Patricia said during their first meeting. "But his biggest mistake was underestimating you." Robert's attorney tried every trick in the book. They claimed Isabella was mentally unstable. They said she had fabricated the evidence. They even suggested that she had been having an affair of her own, though they couldn't produce any evidence to support the claim. Patricia demolished every argument with cold precision. She presented the phone records, the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, and the GPS data that clearly showed Robert's pattern of deception. When Robert's attorney suggested that the affair had only started after the marriage was already over, Patricia produced messages dating back 7 months that proved otherwise. The worst moment came when Robert took the stand. Isabella watched the man she had once loved lie under oath, claiming that their marriage had been troubled for years and that Isabella had been cold and distant. He painted himself as a victim of a loveless marriage who had only sought comfort elsewhere when his wife rejected him. Isabella had prepared for this, but it still hurt to hear him twist their entire relationship into something ugly and false. He made their quiet evenings together sound like punishment. He made her efforts to support his career sound like manipulation. He made her love sound like a burden he had heroically carried for years. When it was Isabella's turn to testify, she spoke quietly and clearly about the marriage she remembered. She talked about the sacrifices she had made, not to make Robert feel guilty, but to establish the financial contributions she had made to their partnership. She spoke about the discovery of the affair without anger or tears, presenting the facts simply and letting them speak for themselves. "Did you know about your husband's relationship with Vanessa Rodriguez before you found the messages on his phone?" Patricia asked. "No," Isabella replied. "I trusted my husband. When he said he was working late or traveling for business, I believed him. When he seemed distant, I assumed he was stressed about work. It never occurred to me that he was living a double life." "What did you do when you discovered the affair?" "I documented everything and contacted an attorney. I knew I needed to protect myself legally and financially." "Did you consider trying to save the marriage?" Isabella paused, looking directly at Robert for the first time during the proceedings. He stared back at her with a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. "No," she said finally. "Robert made it clear in his messages that he had no respect for me or our marriage. He called me boring and claimed I wouldn't fight for him. He was planning a future with another woman while lying to me every day. There was nothing left to save. The cross-examination was brutal. Robert's attorney tried to paint Isabella as a vindictive woman who was trying to punish her husband for falling out of love. He suggested that she had been a neglectful wife who had driven Robert into another woman's arms. But Isabella had learned something important during her months of preparation. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for, including herself. She answered every question calmly and factually. When Robert's attorney tried to rattle her, she remained composed. When he tried to make her sound bitter or angry, she spoke with quiet dignity about the pain of betrayal and the necessity of moving forward. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had clearly seen every variation of marital breakdown, listened to everything with professional detachment. When both sides had presented their cases, she took a 2-week recess to consider her ruling. Those 2 weeks were the longest of Isabella's life. She had moved into a small apartment and was trying to rebuild her life while waiting to learn what her future would look like financially. Robert, meanwhile, had moved in with Vanessa and was already acting like a single man. When they returned to court for the ruling, Isabella was surprised to see how tired and strained Robert looked. Vanessa wasn't with him, which seemed odd since they had been inseparable during the proceedings. Judge Harrison delivered her ruling with crisp efficiency. She had clearly been unimpressed with Robert's testimony and his attorney's tactics. She awarded Isabella exactly what Patricia had asked for: 50% of all marital assets, including Robert's retirement accounts and the equity in their home. She also ordered Robert to pay Isabella's attorney fees, citing his decision to contest well-documented claims of adultery. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said, looking directly at Robert, "your decision to commit adultery and then lie about it under oath has cost you dearly. I hope it was worth it." Outside the courthouse, Robert tried to approach Isabella one last time. She was walking to her car with Patricia when he caught up to them. "Isabella, wait," he called out. She turned to face him, this man who had been her husband for 3 years and her enemy for 6 months. He looked older somehow. The stress of the divorce had aged him. "This doesn't have to be the end," he said. "We could try again. I made mistakes, but we both did. Maybe we could work things out." Isabella stared at him in amazement. After everything they had just been through, after he had tried to destroy her reputation and steal her financial security, he was suggesting they reconcile. "Robert," she said quietly, "you spent 6 months trying to convince a judge that I was crazy, vindictive, and a terrible wife. You testified under oath that our marriage was loveless and that I drove you into another woman's arms. And now you want to work things out." "I was angry," Robert said. "I said things I didn't mean. The divorce brought out the worst in both of us." "No," Isabella replied. "The divorce brought out who you really are. The affair brought out who you really are. I finally see you clearly, Robert, and I don't like what I see." She turned to walk away, then paused. "I hope you and Vanessa are very happy together. You deserve each other." As Isabella drove away from the courthouse for the last time, she felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: hope. The marriage was over, but her life was just beginning. She had survived Robert's betrayal and his attempts to destroy her. She had stood up for herself and won. Now she could finally discover who she was when she wasn't trying to be the perfect wife to an imperfect man. Isabella's new apartment was small and sparse, but it was hers. After years of living in a house decorated to Robert's tastes, the simple one-bedroom space felt like freedom. She had taken very little from the marital home, just her clothes, her books, and a few pieces of furniture that held no memories of their life together. The first few weeks were the hardest. Isabella had to relearn how to be alone without feeling lonely. She had to remember who she was before she became Robert's wife. Some mornings she woke up and reached for her phone to text him about something before remembering that he was no longer part of her life. The divorce settlement had left her financially stable, but Isabella knew she needed more than stability. She needed purpose. Her job at the marketing firm had been comfortable but uninspiring, another area where she had chosen security over passion to please Robert. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Isabella walked into her supervisor's office and gave her notice. "I'm sorry to lose you," Margaret said, looking genuinely surprised. "You're one of our most reliable employees. Are you going to a competitor?" "I'm going back to school," Isabella replied, surprising herself with the words. She hadn't planned to say that, but as soon as the words left her mouth, she knew it was exactly what she wanted to do. That afternoon, Isabella researched graduate programs in marketing and communications. Before her marriage, she had dreamed of working for a major advertising agency or starting her own consulting business. Robert had called those dreams unrealistic and encouraged her to take the safe corporate job instead. Now, looking at program descriptions and course catalogs, Isabella felt excitement she hadn't experienced in years. She could do this. She was only 28 years old. She had the intelligence, the settlement money to pay for school, and most importantly, the motivation to succeed. Isabella applied to 3 programs and was accepted to all of them. She chose the one in Chicago, a fresh start in a new city, far from the memories of her marriage and close enough to her sister Rachel for family support. The hardest part of rebuilding was learning to trust her own judgment again. Years of being told her instincts were wrong, her ideas were impractical, and her feelings were invalid had left Isabella second-guessing every decision. She started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Price, who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships. You may not have bruises, Dr. Price explained during one of their sessions, but emotional abuse leaves its own scars. Robert systematically undermined your confidence and isolated you from your support system. Recovery takes time. Isabella had never thought of her marriage as abusive. Robert had never hit her or screamed at her. But as she worked through her experiences with Dr. Price, she began to recognize the subtle patterns of control and manipulation that had shaped their relationship. The constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions. The way Robert had made her feel guilty for wanting to spend time with friends. The gradual erosion of her interests and independence. The way he had made her feel like she was lucky to have him, that no one else would want someone as boring and needy as she was. He groomed you to be the perfect victim, Dr. Price said. Isolated, dependent, and convinced that you were the problem. The affair wasn't the beginning of his betrayal, it was just the most obvious example of behavior that had been going on for years. As the months passed, Isabella began to remember who she had been before Robert. She started taking photography classes again, rekindling the passion Robert had dismissed as childish. She reached out to old friends she had lost touch with during her marriage. Most importantly, she learned to enjoy her own company. Moving to Chicago for graduate school felt like stepping into a completely different life. Isabella rented a bright apartment near campus and threw herself into her studies. Her professors praised her creativity and analytical skills. Her classmates respected her insights and work ethic. For the first time in years, Isabella felt intellectually challenged and professionally valued. She also learned to date herself. Isabella took herself to movies, museums, and restaurants. She traveled to New York for a weekend just because she wanted to see a photography exhibition. She bought clothes she liked instead of clothes she thought would please someone else. She discovered that she actually enjoyed her own company. The old Isabella would have been terrified to eat alone at a restaurant or attend a movie by herself. The new Isabella realized that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. She could be complete without a partner. That didn't mean she wasn't open to love again. But now she knew what she would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. She had learned the difference between compromise and submission, between love and control. 6 months into graduate school, Isabella ran into someone from her past at a coffee shop near campus. It was Professor Mitchell from her undergraduate program, who had always encouraged her creative thinking. "Isabella, I hardly recognized you," he said, smiling broadly. "You look wonderful. What brings you to Chicago?" As Isabella told him about her graduate program and her plans for the future, she could see his genuine pleasure in her success. This was how people reacted when they truly cared about her well-being, with celebration, not criticism or attempts to diminish her achievements. "I always knew you had more potential than that marketing job allowed," Professor Mitchell said. "You were too creative for corporate work. I'm so glad you're finally pursuing what you really want." Walking back to her apartment that evening, Isabella reflected on how much had changed. 2 years ago, she had been a woman who defined herself entirely through her husband's approval. Now she was a graduate student with her own goals, her own friends, and her own dreams. The divorce had felt like the end of everything. But it had actually been the beginning of everything. Robert had thrown away a woman who loved him completely, but his loss had been Isabella's gain. She had discovered her own strength, her own worth, and her own potential. And she was just getting started. Isabella's graduate program was intense, but she thrived under the pressure. Her professors noticed her dedication and analytical skills, often asking her to present her research to visiting speakers and industry professionals. It was at one of these presentations, a marketing conference focused on digital innovation, that her life took an unexpected turn. She was presenting her research on consumer behavior and social media marketing when she noticed him in the audience. Tall, impeccably dressed, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to follow every word of her presentation. Unlike other audience members who were checking their phones or looking at their watches, this man was completely focused on what she was saying. After her presentation, Isabella was surrounded by professors and industry professionals offering feedback and asking questions. She handled each interaction with the confidence she had built over the past year, but she found herself glancing toward the back of the room where the mysterious man was waiting patiently. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached her with a warm smile that made Isabella's heart skip a beat, something she hadn't felt in over 2 years. "Excellent presentation," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Nicholas Sterling. I found your research fascinating, particularly your insights about authentic engagement versus manipulative marketing tactics." Isabella shook his hand, noting the firm but gentle grip and the way he looked directly into her eyes when he spoke. "Thank you. Are you in marketing as well?" Nicholas smiled. "Among other things. I run a company that focuses on ethical business practices. Your research about building genuine consumer relationships aligns perfectly with our philosophy." They talked for 20 minutes about marketing ethics, consumer psychology, and the future of digital advertising. Isabella found herself impressed by Nicholas's intelligence and integrity. He asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to her answers, treating her ideas with the respect she had learned to expect in her academic life but had never experienced in her marriage. "I hate to cut this short," Nicholas said eventually, "but I have another meeting. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation over dinner tomorrow night? I'd love to hear more about your research, and I might have some opportunities that would interest you." Isabella hesitated. She had been on a few dates since her divorce, but nothing serious. The idea of dating still felt complicated and uncertain. But something about Nicholas seemed different. He was professional, respectful, and genuinely interested in her work rather than just her appearance. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Nicholas handed her his business card. "Excellent. I'll pick you up at 7. It wasn't until Isabella was back in her apartment that evening that she looked closely at the business card. Nicholas Sterling, CEO, Sterling Enterprises. She recognized the name. Sterling Enterprises was a major conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and sustainable energy. Nicholas wasn't just successful, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Isabella's first instinct was panic. What was she doing agreeing to have dinner with someone so far out of her league? She was a graduate student living in a modest apartment, still rebuilding her life after a devastating divorce. He was a billionaire CEO who could probably have dinner with anyone he wanted. But then she caught herself. This was exactly the kind of self-doubt that Dr. Price had warned her about. The old Isabella might have canceled the date out of insecurity. The new Isabella reminded herself that Nicholas had approached her after being impressed by her intelligence and research, not because he felt sorry for her or was looking for someone beneath his social status. She decided to treat it like any other dinner with a professional contact. If it led to something more, fine. If not, she would have had an interesting evening and possibly made a valuable connection. Isabella spent the next day trying not to overthink what to wear. She settled on a simple black dress that was professional but elegant, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. She looked polished and confident without trying too hard to impress. Nicholas arrived exactly at 7, driving a sleek but understated car that probably cost more than most people's houses but didn't scream for attention. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a navy blazer, looking more like a successful professional than a billionaire playboy. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Isabella believed he meant it. The restaurant Nicholas had chosen was upscale but not pretentious. The atmosphere was intimate without being romantic, perfect for a business dinner that might become something more. Nicholas had clearly chosen carefully, and Isabella appreciated the thoughtfulness. Over dinner they talked about everything except his wealth and her divorce. Nicholas asked about her photography hobby, her graduate research, and her plans for the future. He shared stories about building his company, the challenges of ethical business practices, and his passion for renewable energy. Isabella found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. Nicholas was easy to talk to, genuinely funny and clearly intelligent. He treated the waitstaff with respect, listened more than he talked, and never once made Isabella feel like he was doing her a favor by taking her to dinner. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nicholas said over dessert. Isabella tensed slightly. This was usually when men asked about her relationship status or made assumptions about what she was looking for. "Of course. Why marketing? Your presentation today showed real passion for the subject, but I get the sense it's a relatively recent passion." Isabella was surprised by the perceptiveness of the question. "You're right. I actually started in marketing because it seemed practical and stable. I was married to someone who valued security over passion. But after my divorce, I realized I wanted more than just a paycheck. I wanted to do work that actually mattered. Divorce is tough, Nicholas said gently. How long have you been divorced? About a year and a half. The marriage ended badly, but looking back, I think it was the best thing that could have happened to me. I learned a lot about myself. Nicholas nodded. I've never been married, but I've seen enough bad relationships to know that sometimes ending things is the bravest choice you can make. It takes real strength to start over. Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest. Nicholas understood. He didn't treat her divorce like a failure or a red flag. He saw it as evidence of her strength. What about you? Isabella asked. 34 years old and never married? That must be unusual in your social circle. Nicholas laughed. Very unusual. But I've seen too many people get married for the wrong reasons: social expectations, business advantages, fear of being alone. I'd rather be single than settle for something that isn't real. They talked until the restaurant began to empty around them. Nicholas insisted on driving Isabella home, and as they sat in his car outside her apartment building, she felt a connection she hadn't expected. I had a wonderful evening, Nicholas said. Would you be interested in doing this again? Isabella looked at this man who had treated her with more respect and genuine interest in one evening than her ex-husband had shown in 3 years of marriage. Yes, she said. I would. As Isabella watched Nicholas drive away, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed: excitement about the future. Not the desperate hope of her marriage or the grim determination of her divorce, but genuine anticipation for what might come next. She was ready to find out. Over the next 3 months, Nicholas and Isabella saw each other regularly. Their dates ranged from quiet dinners to art gallery openings to long walks along Lake Michigan. Nicholas was unlike anyone Isabella had ever known: successful beyond imagination but completely without arrogance, wealthy but generous with his time and attention rather than just his money. What impressed Isabella most was how Nicholas treated her as an equal partner in whatever they were doing. When they went to business events, he introduced her proudly and included her in conversations. When they discussed her graduate work, he offered insights and connections without trying to take over or mansplain her own research to her. The contrast with her marriage couldn't have been starker. Robert had treated Isabella like an accessory, someone to look good on his arm and support his ambitions but never to have ambitions of her own. Nicholas treated her like a partner, someone whose thoughts and dreams mattered as much as his own. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally. Nicholas never pressured Isabella for physical intimacy or demanded more of her time than she was comfortable giving. He understood that she was still healing from her divorce and building her own life. Instead of seeing her independence as a threat, he seemed to admire it. "You're different from other women I've dated," Nicholas told her one evening as they walked through Millennium Park after dinner. "Different how?" Isabella asked, not sure if she wanted to hear the answer. "Stronger. More complete on your own. Most people I meet want something from me: money, connections, status. You already have your own goals and your own path. It makes me want to know you, not just impress you." Isabella felt her chest tighten with emotion. "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." "That's sad," Nicholas said gently. "Someone as remarkable as you should hear things like that every day." It was moments like these that made Isabella realize how starved she had been for genuine appreciation. Robert had complimented her appearance when it suited him but had never acknowledged her intelligence, her strength, or her worth as a person. Nicholas seemed to see all of her, not just the parts that pleased him. 3 months into their relationship, Nicholas invited Isabella to accompany him to a charity gala. It would be their first truly public appearance together, and Isabella was nervous about entering his social world. "What if people think I'm just another gold digger?" Isabella asked as they got ready for the event. Nicholas stopped adjusting his tie and turned to face her. "Isabella, look at me. Do you care about my money?" "No," she said honestly. "I mean, I appreciate that you can take me to nice places and that you're generous with charity, but that's not why I'm with you." "Then why are you with me?" Isabella thought about it carefully. "Because you make me laugh. Because you listen when I talk. Because you encourage my dreams instead of dismissing them. Because you treat me like an equal partner instead of a subordinate." "And that's exactly why I'm with you," Nicholas said. "Because you see me as a person, not a bank account. Because you challenge me intellectually. Because you have your own life and goals that don't revolve around me. Anyone who thinks you're a gold digger doesn't know either of us very well." The gala was a revelation for Isabella. She watched Nicholas work the room, raising money for children's literacy programs, and saw a side of him she hadn't fully appreciated before. He wasn't just successful in business, he was using his success to make a real difference in the world. "Nicholas tells me you're doing graduate work in marketing," said Margaret Thornton, the wife of a prominent businessman. "How lovely. A little hobby to keep you busy." Before Isabella could respond, Nicholas appeared at her side. "Actually, Isabella is developing groundbreaking research on ethical marketing practices. Harvard Business Review is considering publishing her work. She's brilliant." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Isabella felt a warmth she had never experienced with Robert. Nicholas genuinely admired her accomplishments and wanted other people to know about them. Later that evening, as they danced to a live orchestra, Nicholas pulled Isabella closer. "I love you," he said quietly, the words barely audible over the music. Isabella's breath caught. She had been falling in love with Nicholas for weeks but hadn't dared to say it first. The words had been burned out of her by her marriage. She had told Robert she loved him countless times without hearing it back, or hearing it only when he wanted something from her. "I love you too," she whispered back, and meant it completely. This love felt different from what she had experienced with Robert. It wasn't desperate or needy or based on fear of losing someone. It was calm and strong and built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. Isabella loved Nicholas for who he was, not for who she hoped he might become. And she could feel that he loved her the same way. 6 months later, Nicholas took Isabella to Paris for her spring break. They spent a week exploring the city, visiting museums, eating at small cafes, and talking for hours about everything and nothing. On their last night, as they watched the sunset from their hotel balcony overlooking the Seine, Nicholas got down on one knee. "Isabella Martinez," he said, pulling out a simple but elegant ring, "you've shown me what real partnership looks like. You've taught me that love isn't about possession or control, it's about supporting each other's dreams and building something beautiful together. Will you marry me?" Isabella looked down at this man who had helped her rebuild her faith in love and partnership. Nicholas wasn't proposing because he was lonely or because society expected it. He was proposing because he wanted to spend his life with her, building something meaningful together. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal and pain of her first marriage had nearly destroyed her faith in love. But it had also taught her what real love should look like. Without Robert's betrayal, she might never have developed the strength and self-knowledge that allowed her to recognize and accept genuine love when it finally appeared. She was grateful for the pain now because it had led her to Nicholas. More importantly, it had led her to herself. Isabella's engagement to Nicholas created a media sensation that neither of them had anticipated. Within days of their announcement, gossip magazines were speculating about their relationship, her background, and his motives. The attention was overwhelming and occasionally cruel. "Billionaire's mystery woman, from divorce court to diamond rings," read one particularly nasty headline, accompanied by an unflattering photo of Isabella leaving the courthouse after her divorce from Robert. "Ignore it," Nicholas advised as Isabella stared at her laptop screen in dismay. "These people don't know us. They're just trying to sell magazines with sensational stories." But Isabella found it harder to dismiss than Nicholas did. She had worked so hard to rebuild her confidence and create a new identity for herself. Seeing herself portrayed as a gold digger or a rebound girlfriend felt like having her progress erased. The worst part was the constant comparisons to Nicholas's previous girlfriends, all of them wealthy socialites or celebrities who looked perfect in photographs and had never experienced failure or public humiliation. Isabella began to doubt herself again, wondering if Nicholas would eventually tire of defending their relationship against public speculation. "I'm thinking of declining the Harvard Business Review publication," Isabella told Dr. Price during one of their sessions. "With all this media attention, I don't want people to think I only got published because of my engagement to Nicholas." "Isabella," Dr. Price said firmly, "you're letting other people's opinions dictate your choices again. That's exactly what you did in your marriage to Robert. Don't give that power to strangers who don't even know you." Dr. Price was right. Isabella had spent too many years letting other people's judgments control her decisions. She wasn't going to start again now, especially not when she was so close to achieving her professional goals. The Harvard Business Review article was published 3 months before their wedding and received significant attention in marketing circles. Isabella was invited to speak at conferences and consult with major brands about ethical marketing practices. Her career was taking off exactly as she had dreamed. Planning the wedding was a delicate balance between Nicholas's social obligations and Isabella's desire for something personal and meaningful. They compromised on a medium-sized ceremony at Nicholas's estate, with close friends and family plus a selection of business associates and philanthropic partners. Isabella's sister Rachel served as maid of honor, and watching her walk down the aisle filled Isabella with joy. Rachel had been her strongest supporter during the divorce and her biggest cheerleader as Isabella rebuilt her life. "I'm so proud of you," Rachel whispered as she hugged Isabella before the ceremony. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the best thing." The wedding ceremony was everything Isabella had dreamed of but never thought she deserved. Nicholas had written his own vows, speaking about partnership, respect, and building a life based on shared values rather than need or fear. "Isabella," he said, looking directly into her eyes as he spoke, "you taught me that real love isn't about finding someone to complete you, it's about finding someone who inspires you to be the best version of yourself. You inspire me every day to be more generous, more thoughtful, and more grateful for the life I've been given. I promise to support your dreams as enthusiastically as I pursue my own. I promise to treat you as an equal partner in everything we build together. And I promise to love you not just for who you are today, but for who you're still becoming." Isabella's vows focused on gratitude, growth, and partnership. "Nicholas, you showed me what love looks like when it's built on respect instead of need. You helped me understand that I don't need someone to rescue me, I need someone who will stand beside me as I rescue myself. Thank you for seeing my strength when I was still discovering it. Thank you for encouraging my dreams when they were still taking shape. And thank you for loving me not despite my past, but because of how it shaped me into the woman I am today." The reception was elegant but warm, with heartfelt toasts from friends and family who had watched both Nicholas and Isabella grow into the people they had become. Isabella's college friend Emma, whom she had reconnected with after her divorce, spoke about watching Isabella transform from someone who diminished herself to please others into someone who knew her own worth. "Isabella has shown all of us what it means to rise from the ashes," Emma said, raising her champagne glass. "She didn't just survive her divorce, she used it as fuel to become the most confident, successful, and radiant person I know. Nicholas, you're not just getting a wonderful wife. You're getting a woman who knows exactly who she is and what she's worth." As Isabella and Nicholas danced their first dance as husband and wife, she felt a peace she had never experienced before. This was what marriage was supposed to feel like, not desperate or needy or fearful, but strong and secure and full of possibility. "No regrets," Nicholas whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. Isabella thought about the question seriously. 3 years ago, she had been a broken woman sitting in her car reading her husband's messages to his mistress. 2 years ago, she had been fighting for her dignity in divorce court. 1 year ago, she had been a graduate student rebuilding her life from scratch. Now she was married to a man who loved and respected her, pursuing a career that fulfilled her, and surrounded by people who supported her growth. The journey had been painful, but every step had led her to this moment. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not even about Robert. If he hadn't betrayed me, I never would have discovered how strong I could be. I never would have learned to love myself. And I never would have been ready for real love when it finally arrived." Nicholas spun her around and Isabella laughed with pure joy. She had learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing, if you're brave enough to use it as a foundation for building something better. Her new life was just beginning and she couldn't wait to see what came next. The morning of Isabella's wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that made everything feel like a fairy tale. As she sat in the bridal suite at Nicholas's estate, surrounded by her sister Rachel and her closest friends, Isabella felt a sense of calm anticipation that was completely different from the nervous energy she remembered from her first wedding. 3 years ago, she had been anxious about whether Robert would show up on time, whether his family would approve of the budget reception, whether she looked good enough to deserve him. Today, she felt nothing but excitement about marrying the man who had helped her discover her own worth. "You look absolutely radiant," Rachel said as she helped Isabella into her dress. "I've never seen you this happy." The dress was perfect, elegant, and sophisticated without being ostentatious. Isabella had chosen it herself, trusting her own taste instead of seeking approval from others. It represented everything about her new life, confident, authentic, and entirely her own choice. As Isabella looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized from 3 years ago. This bride was strong, successful, and marrying someone who celebrated her accomplishments rather than feeling threatened by them. She was choosing this marriage from a position of strength, not desperation. Nicholas had insisted on following tradition and not seeing Isabella before the ceremony, but he had sent her a note that morning. "My dearest Isabella, today we begin the greatest adventure of our lives. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle, not because you'll look beautiful, which you always do, but because you'll be walking toward our future together. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like. All my love, Nicholas. The ceremony was held in the garden of Nicholas's estate, with white roses and greenery creating a romantic but understated backdrop. As Isabella's father walked her down the aisle, she saw Nicholas waiting at the altar with the biggest smile she had ever seen. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo and looking more handsome than any man had a right to look, but what took her breath away was the love and pride in his eyes. The guest list was a perfect blend of both their worlds. Isabella's family and college friends sat alongside Nicholas's business associates and philanthropic partners. Her graduate school professors were there, as were several of the marketing executives who had been impressed by her research. This wasn't just a merger of two people, it was a celebration of the life Isabella had built for herself. When they reached the altar, Isabella's father kissed her cheek and whispered, "He's a good man, sweetheart. You chose well this time." The officiant was Nicholas's longtime friend and mentor, Judge Patricia Morrison, who had known Nicholas since he was starting his first business. She spoke about witnessing his transformation from a successful but guarded young man into someone who had learned to open his heart completely. "Nicholas has achieved remarkable success in business," Judge Morrison said, "but his greatest achievement is learning to love and be loved authentically. Isabella, you have not only won the heart of a good man, you have helped him become an even better man." When it came time for vows, Nicholas spoke first. His voice was clear and strong, carrying across the garden to every guest. "Isabella, when I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted in a partner. I wanted someone who would complement my life and share my interests. What I discovered was that I needed someone who would challenge me to become better than I ever thought I could be." He paused, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that made Isabella's heart race. "You showed me that real partnership isn't about finding someone who needs you, it's about finding someone who chooses you every day, even when they don't need you at all. You chose to rebuild your life after betrayal. You chose to pursue your dreams when it would have been easier to play it safe. And you chose to love again when you had every reason to protect your heart." Isabella felt tears starting to form, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I promise to support your dreams as passionately as I pursue my own. I promise to celebrate your successes without feeling diminished by them. I promise to stand beside you through challenges without trying to solve them for you. And I promise to love you not just for who you are today, but for who you're becoming every day." When Isabella spoke her vows, her voice was steady and confident. She had written and rewritten them dozens of times, but standing there in front of Nicholas, the words came from her heart. "Nicholas, 3 years ago I thought my life was over. I had trusted someone who didn't deserve it, and I believed his lies about my worth and my potential. I was broken, angry, and convinced that I would never be able to trust again." She took a deep breath, aware that every word was carrying across the garden to their guests, many of whom knew the story of her first marriage. "You didn't rescue me from that darkness, you helped me find the strength to rescue myself. You saw potential in me that I had forgotten existed. You celebrated my independence instead of trying to control it. You made me want to become the best version of myself, not to please you, but because you helped me remember who I really was." Isabella reached for Nicholas's hands, holding them tightly as she continued. "I promise to love you from a place of strength, not need. I promise to be your partner in building something beautiful together, not your dependent waiting to be saved. I promise to support your dreams while pursuing my own. And I promise to never take for granted the gift of being loved by someone who truly sees me." When Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was tender and full of promise. As their guests erupted in applause and cheers, Isabella felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. The reception was held in a tent on the estate grounds, decorated with thousands of white lights and the same white roses from the ceremony. Isabella had worried that the mix of guests would be awkward, but watching her graduate school friends chatting with Nicholas's business partners and her family laughing with his philanthropic colleagues, she realized that good people could connect regardless of their backgrounds. The highlight of the reception was the toasts. Rachel spoke about watching Isabella transform from someone who had lost herself in her first marriage into someone who had found herself in the aftermath. Nicholas's business partner and best friend, Jonathan, told stories about watching Nicholas become happier and more grounded since meeting Isabella. But the most moving toast came from Dr. Price, Isabella's therapist, who had become a friend and mentor. "I've had the privilege of watching Isabella's journey from victim to survivor to victor," Dr. Price said. "She didn't just heal from her trauma, she used it to build something beautiful. Isabella, you have shown all of us what it means to turn pain into power, betrayal into strength, and endings into new beginnings. As Isabella and Nicholas danced their first dance to At Last by Etta James, Isabella felt like the lyrics were written specifically for their story. At last her love had come along. At last she had found someone who loved her for exactly who she was. Happy? Nicholas whispered as they swayed together. Completely, Isabella replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Looking around at their celebration, at the friends who supported them, the family who loved them, and the future they were building together, Isabella knew that every painful step of her journey had led to this perfect moment. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to love, living exactly the life she had been brave enough to build. 3 years into their marriage, Isabella and Nicholas had settled into a life that exceeded Isabella's wildest dreams. Their relationship had only grown stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership that Isabella had never imagined possible. She had completed her graduate degree with honors and started her own marketing consultancy, working with companies that wanted to build authentic relationships with their customers. Nicholas had been her biggest supporter throughout the process, celebrating her successes and offering comfort during the inevitable setbacks of building a business. Their home was filled with laughter, intellectual conversations, and the kind of easy intimacy that comes from truly knowing and accepting another person. Isabella often reflected on how different this marriage was from her first. Where Robert had diminished her, Nicholas celebrated her. Where Robert had isolated her, Nicholas encouraged her friendships and family relationships. Where Robert had made her feel like she was lucky to be chosen, Nicholas made her feel like an equal partner in building something beautiful together. On a Friday evening in October, Isabella and Nicholas were having dinner at Chez Laurent, an upscale French restaurant they particularly enjoyed. They were celebrating the success of Isabella's latest campaign for a sustainable fashion brand, which had won a prestigious industry award. "I'm so proud of you," Nicholas said, raising his wine glass in a toast. "Watching you build your business has been incredible. You've created exactly what you dreamed of." Isabella clinked her glass against his, feeling grateful for the 1000th time for this man who genuinely celebrated her achievements. "I couldn't have done it without your support. Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." They were deep in conversation about Isabella's plans to expand her consultancy when she noticed a familiar figure being seated across the restaurant. Her heart stopped as she recognized Robert, her ex-husband, whom she hadn't seen since their divorce proceedings 3 years earlier. He looked older, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. His hair was starting to thin, and he had gained weight that made him look soft and tired. But what struck Isabella most was how small he seemed. The man who had once loomed so large in her life, who had made her feel insignificant and worthless, looked diminished and ordinary. Robert was alone, which surprised Isabella. She had assumed he would be with Vanessa, the secretary he had left her for. As she watched him order a drink and stare morosely at his phone, Isabella felt something unexpected: pity. "What's wrong?" Nicholas asked, noticing the change in her expression. "My ex-husband just walked in," Isabella said quietly. "Over there by the window." Nicholas turned slightly to look, then turned back to Isabella with raised eyebrows. "That's him? He looks..." Nicholas paused diplomatically. "Pathetic?" Isabella supplied. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing." What surprised Isabella most was her own emotional reaction or lack thereof. 3 years ago, seeing Robert unexpectedly would have sent her into a panic. She would have worried about her appearance, felt ashamed of her failed marriage, or been angry about his betrayal. Now, looking at him across the restaurant, she felt nothing but mild curiosity about how his life had turned out. "Do you want to leave?" Nicholas asked gently. Isabella considered it for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I'm not going to let him disrupt our celebration. Besides, I'm curious to see if he notices me." It didn't take long. As Robert scanned the restaurant, his gaze fell on Isabella and Nicholas's table. Isabella watched as recognition dawned on his face, followed by what looked like shock. His eyes widened as he took in Isabella's appearance, her elegant dress, her confident posture, and the obvious quality of the restaurant they were in. Then Robert's gaze shifted to Nicholas, and Isabella saw his expression change from shock to something that looked like dismay. Even from across the restaurant, it was clear that Nicholas was successful, handsome, and completely devoted to Isabella. The way Nicholas looked at her, touched her hand, and listened intently to everything she said was a stark contrast to how Robert had treated her during their marriage. "He's staring," Nicholas observed. "Let him stare," Isabella replied, surprised by how unbothered she felt. "I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of." They finished their meal without incident, though Isabella was aware of Robert's periodic glances in their direction. As they prepared to leave, Robert suddenly appeared at their table. "Isabella," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of nervousness and forced casualness. "I thought that was you. You look different." Isabella looked up at her ex-husband, noting the way he avoided making eye contact with Nicholas. "Hello, Robert. Different how?" "Successful. Confident." Robert's gaze flickered to Nicholas, then back to Isabella. "I heard about your business. Congratulations." "Thank you," Isabella replied politely. "Robert, this is my husband, Nicholas Sterling." "Nicholas, this is Robert, my ex-husband." Nicholas stood and extended his hand, which Robert shook reluctantly. The contrast between the two men was striking. Nicholas tall, confident, and at ease, while Robert seemed diminished and uncomfortable. "Sterling," Robert repeated, recognition dawning. "Sterling Enterprises?" "That's right," Nicholas replied smoothly. Isabella watched Robert's face as he processed this information. She could see him calculating, realizing that his ex-wife had not only recovered from their divorce but had married someone far more successful than he would ever be. "Well," Robert said awkwardly, "it's good to see you doing so well, Isabella. I always knew you had potential." The audacity of the statement might have angered the old Isabella, but the new Isabella found it almost amusing. "Thank you, Robert. I hope you're doing well too." "I am," Robert said quickly, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "Very well. Vanessa and I." He paused, seeming to reconsider what he was about to say. "We're very happy." Isabella noticed he didn't mention marriage, and she wondered briefly what had happened between Robert and the secretary he had been so eager to leave his marriage for. But she found that she didn't really care enough to ask. "That's wonderful," Isabella said sincerely. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." Nicholas placed his hand gently on Isabella's shoulder. "We should go, darling. We have that early meeting tomorrow." Isabella stood, and as she did, she realized that she was now looking down at Robert slightly. Whether it was her heels, her posture, or simply her newfound confidence, she seemed to tower over the man who had once made her feel so small. "It was good to see you, Robert," she said graciously. "Take care of yourself." As they walked away, Isabella could feel Robert's eyes following them. At the valet stand, Nicholas wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Isabella considered the question carefully. "I'm perfect," she said, surprised by how true it was. "Seeing him tonight reminded me of how far I've come. 3 years ago that man made me feel worthless. Tonight, looking at him, I felt grateful." "Grateful?" "Grateful that he showed me who he really was before I wasted any more years of my life. Grateful that his betrayal forced me to discover my own strength. And grateful that losing him led me to you." Nicholas kissed her forehead tenderly. "His loss was definitely my gain." As they drove home, Isabella reflected on the evening. The encounter with Robert had been a gift, in a way. It had shown her definitively that she had not only survived his betrayal but had used it to build something infinitely better than what they had shared. She was no longer the woman who had once begged for Robert's attention and approval. She was a successful businesswoman, a beloved wife, and most importantly, someone who knew her own worth. Robert had gotten exactly what he deserved, and so had she. The next morning, Isabella woke up feeling lighter than she had in months. The encounter with Robert had been unexpectedly liberating, like closing a door on a chapter of her life that had been left slightly open. She found Nicholas in the kitchen, making coffee and reading the business section of the newspaper. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, pulling her into his arms for a kiss. "How are you feeling about last night?" "Victorious," Isabella said, surprising herself with the word choice. "Not in a vindictive way but in a justice has been served way. Does that make sense?" Nicholas poured her a cup of coffee, adding cream exactly the way she liked it. "Perfect sense. You worked hard to build this life. You deserve to feel proud of what you've accomplished." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it casually, then did a double take when she saw Robert's name on the screen. "He texted me," she told Nicholas, showing him the phone. The message read, "Isabella, it was so good to see you last night. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee sometime? There are things I'd like to say to you. Things I should have said a long time ago." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. 3 years of silence, then he sees you happy and successful and suddenly wants to talk. Isabella stared at the message, trying to decide how to respond. Part of her was curious about what Robert wanted to say. Another part of her felt like any conversation with him would be pointless and potentially harmful to the peace she had found. What do you think I should do? She asked Nicholas. What do you want to do? Isabella considered the question carefully. I think I want to meet with him. Not because I owe him anything, but because I want to show him and myself that he can't hurt me anymore. I want to close this chapter completely. Nicholas nodded. Then do it. Just remember that you don't owe him forgiveness, understanding, or a second chance. You don't owe him anything. Isabella texted back. I can meet you for coffee on Tuesday at 2 p.m. The Starbucks on Michigan Avenue. Robert's response came immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. On Tuesday afternoon, Isabella arrived at Starbucks 15 minutes early, wanting to choose her seat and settle in before Robert arrived. She wore a simple but elegant business suit that made her look professional and successful without trying too hard. She wanted Robert to see exactly who she had become. When Robert walked in, Isabella was struck again by how diminished he seemed. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive but didn't quite fit right, and his face had the slightly desperate look of someone who was trying too hard to appear successful. Isabella, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. You look incredible. Thank you, Isabella replied neutrally. You said you had things you wanted to say to me. Robert fidgeted with his coffee cup, clearly nervous. I want to apologize. For everything. The affair, the lies, the way I treated you during the divorce. I was angry and hurt and I said things I didn't mean. Isabella waited for him to continue, but he seemed to expect some response. Okay, she said simply. I made a mistake, Robert continued, his voice becoming more urgent. A huge mistake. Vanessa and I, it didn't work out the way I thought it would. We broke up 6 months ago. She was too demanding, too high maintenance. She didn't understand me the way you did. Isabella felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly followed by pity. I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. Isabella, I know this sounds crazy, but seeing you last night made me realize what I lost. You were the best thing in my life and I threw it away for someone who didn't deserve me. Isabella stared at Robert in amazement. Even now, even after everything that had happened, he was making it about himself. Vanessa didn't deserve him. Isabella was the best thing in his life. It was still all about what he had lost, what he deserved, what he needed. Robert, Isabella said calmly, do you remember what you said to me the night I confronted you about the affair? Robert looked confused. I said a lot of things. I was angry. You said I was boring. You said I was like being married to a robot. You said Vanessa made you happy in ways I never could. You testified in court that our marriage was loveless and that I was cold and distant. Robert shifted uncomfortably. I was hurt and angry. I didn't mean those things. Which is it, Robert? Was I the best thing in your life, or was I a boring robot who drove you into another woman's arms? Because you can't have it both ways. I was confused, Robert said desperately. I didn't know what I wanted. But I know now. I want you back, Isabella. I want us to try again. Isabella felt a moment of surreal disbelief. After everything they had been through, after 3 years of building a new life, Robert actually thought she would consider taking him back. Robert, she said gently, I'm married. Happily married. To a man who has never once made me feel boring or inadequate or unworthy of love. But we have history, Robert protested. We loved each other once. That has to count for something. Yes, we have history. But history isn't destiny. Our history is that you cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to destroy me financially and emotionally during our divorce. Why would I want to return to that? Robert leaned forward, his voice becoming desperate. Because I've changed. I know what I want now. I want the life we had before everything went wrong. The life we had before everything went wrong was a life where I had no identity outside of being your wife. Where I gave up my friends, my hobbies, and my dreams to support yours. Where I walked on eggshells trying not to displease you. That wasn't a good life, Robert. It was just a life I accepted because I didn't know I deserved better. I would treat you better this time, Robert insisted. I know your worth now. Isabella smiled sadly. No, Robert. You know my market value now. You saw me with a successful, handsome husband in an expensive restaurant, and suddenly I became valuable to you again. But my actual worth, my intelligence, my kindness, my loyalty, my strength, those things were always there. You just couldn't see them because you were too busy trying to make me smaller so you could feel bigger. Robert stared at her, seemingly unable to process what she was saying. The woman you want back doesn't exist anymore, Isabella continued. The woman who would sacrifice her own happiness for yours, who would accept crumbs of affection and call it love, who would forgive betrayal because she was afraid of being alone, that woman is gone. I killed her the day I filed for divorce and I'm glad I did. So this is it? Robert asked, his voice hollow. You're really not going to give us another chance? Isabella looked at this man who had once had the power to devastate her with a single cruel word. Now he seemed pathetic and small, begging for something he had thrown away and couldn't understand why he couldn't have back. Robert, I hope you find happiness. I really do. But it won't be with me. I have a husband who loves me, respects me, and supports my dreams. I have a career I'm passionate about. I have friends who value me and a family who supports me. I have everything I ever wanted, and none of it depends on you. Isabella stood up, gathering her purse. Thank you for the apology. I accept it not because you deserve forgiveness but because I deserve peace. But this is goodbye, Robert. Really and truly goodbye. As she walked toward the door, Robert called after her desperately. Isabella, wait. Please. Can't we at least be friends? Isabella turned back one last time. Robert, friends don't cheat on each other. Friends don't lie to each other. Friends don't try to destroy each other when things don't work out. We were never friends. We were husband and wife, and we weren't very good at that either. Walking out of that Starbucks, Isabella felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. The woman who had once begged for Robert's love and approval was truly gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept anything less than she deserved. Her phone rang as she reached her car. It was Nicholas. How did it go? He asked gently. Perfect, Isabella said, and she meant it. He wanted me back. He actually thought I would leave you and our life together to return to him. And how did that make you feel? Isabella laughed, a sound of pure joy and disbelief. Powerful. For the first time in my relationship with Robert, I held all the cards. I had everything he wanted and nothing he could take away from me. It was the most liberating feeling I've ever experienced. I'm proud of you, Nicholas said. I know that couldn't have been easy. It was easier than I expected, Isabella replied honestly. 3 years ago, I thought losing Robert meant losing everything. Today, I realized that losing Robert was how I gained everything that actually matters. That evening, Isabella and Nicholas sat on their terrace, watching the sunset over the city. Isabella told him about every detail of her conversation with Robert, marveling at how different she felt now compared to how she had felt during their marriage. Do you know what the best part was? Isabella asked, curled up against Nicholas's side. Tell me. For the entire conversation, I wasn't thinking about what he thought of me or whether I was saying the right thing or whether I was being too harsh. I was just being myself, honest, direct, and completely comfortable with my choices. The old Isabella would have worried about hurting his feelings or being too mean. The new Isabella just told the truth. Nicholas kissed the top of her head. That's because you finally understand your worth. You're not responsible for managing other people's emotions or protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Isabella thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. The devastating discovery of Robert's affair. The painful divorce proceedings. The slow process of rebuilding her confidence in her life. Meeting Nicholas and learning what real love looked like. Building a successful career on her own terms. Every step had been necessary. Every painful moment had taught her something essential about herself and what she deserved. If Robert hadn't betrayed her, she might still be living that small, diminished life, convinced it was all she could hope for. I'm grateful to him, Isabella said suddenly. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Grateful? His betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to discover who I really was and what I was capable of. Without that pain, I never would have had the courage to pursue my dreams or demand the kind of love I deserved. I never would have been ready for you. His loss, my gain, Nicholas said, echoing his words from their first meeting with Robert. Isabella smiled. His loss, my gain too. I gained myself. I gained my strength. I gained a life I actually want to live instead of a life I was settling for. 3 months later, Isabella received an invitation to her college reunion. Attached was a note from the organizing committee asking if she would be willing to speak about her success in business and her marriage to Nicholas Sterling. The letter mentioned that her story of rising from the ashes of a difficult divorce to build an empire of her own had inspired many of their classmates. Isabella showed the letter to Nicholas over breakfast. They want me to speak about overcoming adversity. About turning failure into success. Are you interested? Isabella considered it carefully. A year ago, she might have been embarrassed to have her divorce be such public knowledge. Now she felt proud of the journey she had taken. Yes, she said. I think I am. If my story can help even one person realize they deserve better than they're accepting, it's worth sharing. At the reunion, Isabella's speech was the highlight of the evening. She spoke honestly about her first marriage, her divorce, and the process of rebuilding her life. She talked about the difference between settling and choosing, between being chosen and being valued. "I thought my divorce was the end of my story," she told her classmates. "It turned out to be the beginning of my real story. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing because it forces you to become who you were always meant to be." After her speech, dozens of classmates approached her with their own stories of difficult relationships, career changes, and personal transformations. Isabella realized that her journey, while painful, was not unique. Many people had to learn the hard way what they deserved and what they wouldn't accept. The difference was that Isabella had used her pain as fuel for growth instead of an excuse for bitterness. She had taken responsibility for her own happiness instead of waiting for someone else to provide it. As Isabella and Nicholas drove home from the reunion, Isabella reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 5 years. She had gone from a woman who defined herself entirely through her husband's approval to a woman who knew her own worth and lived according to her own values. "Any regrets?" Nicholas asked as he had on their wedding day. Isabella looked at her husband, her partner, her equal, and felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. Every painful step led me to this perfect life. I wouldn't change anything." And she meant it completely. The betrayal that had once nearly destroyed her had become the foundation of everything beautiful in her life. Robert's cruelty had taught her to recognize and appreciate Nicholas's kindness. Robert's control had taught her to value Nicholas's respect for her independence. Robert's lies had taught her to treasure Nicholas's honesty. Isabella had learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really worth. Sometimes you have to be broken to understand how strong you can become. And sometimes the person who hurts you the most ends up doing you the greatest favor by showing you that you deserve so much more than you were accepting. As they pulled into their driveway, Isabella saw their beautiful home, thought about her thriving business, and looked at the man who loved her completely. She had built a life that exceeded her wildest dreams, and she had done it by refusing to accept less than she deserved. Robert had gotten exactly what he deserved, a woman who left him when she found someone better, just as he had done to Isabella. The difference was that Isabella had actually found someone better, while Robert had discovered that the grass wasn't greener after all. Justice, Isabella thought with satisfaction, had been served perfectly, and she was living proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.